Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Connor Reed. I've been a swim instructor at the Pacific Aquatic Center in San Diego for 8 years. Most days started the same. Unlock the gate by 5:30 a.m., check the chlorine levels in the main lap pool, and make sure the lane lines were secured. We had a decent routine at the facility, quiet, predictable, just the way I liked it. Tuesday, July 9th, started no differently at first. I arrived just before dawn, parking my 2011 Toyota Tacoma in the staff lot behind the rec center. The sky had that soft pink hue you only get on coastal mornings. I remember adjusting my whistle lanyard in the rearview mirror and noting how calm everything felt. There was no reason to think that, in just a few hours, our world would tear apart at the seams. At 5:45 a.m., I was inside the facility, walking the perimeter and checking the pool deck. Chlorine levels were at 3.2 ppm, right within our recommended range. I heard the front doors buzz as someone came in using a staff badge. It was Maria Alvarez, our morning receptionist. She'd worked the desk longer than I'd been teaching here. Kind early 60s, always brought baked goods for the staff. "Morning, Connor," she called over, placing her tote bag behind the reception desk. "Hey, Maria. Coffee's fresh in the lifeguard office if you want a cup." She smiled and gave a little salute. "Don't tempt me. My blood pressure's already mad at me." I headed back toward the staff room to drop off my gym bag and checked my phone. That's when I noticed the first sign that something was off. I had 7 missed alerts from the San Diego County Office of Emergency Services. That never happened. I tapped one open and squinted at the text. Emergency notification. Widespread disturbances in urban areas. Avoid unnecessary travel. More information to follow. Disturbances? That was vague. I thought maybe a blackout or another wildfire warning. But the next alert was worse. Do not approach individuals displaying erratic behavior or signs of aggression. Remain indoors. Await further guidance. I showed the message to Jason, one of our lifeguards, as he walked in with a Gatorade and a puzzled look on his face. "You see this?" I asked. "Yeah, I got that too. What's it even mean? Like protests or something?" "Doesn't say." We both looked out the big glass doors that faced the street. Early joggers still moved through the park across the road. A guy was walking his dog like everything was fine. It didn't make sense. Everything looked normal. Still, my gut was unsettled. A good swim instructor learns to trust that feeling. By 6:15 a.m., we had about 10 regulars in the water. Most of them were retirees doing laps or aqua aerobics. I was setting up for the 7 a.m. youth swim class when someone began pounding on the side gate of the facility. I stepped out to check. A man in cargo pants and a flannel shirt was slamming his fists against the chain-link gate. His face was pale, mouth bloody. At first, I thought he was injured, maybe needed help, but then I noticed his eyes. They were wide, unblinking, and locked on me like I was prey. I instinctively stepped back. "Sir, are you okay?" I called. He didn't answer, just kept pounding on the gate. Then he let out a deep, gurgling growl and rammed his shoulder into the latch hard enough to rattle the frame. I stepped inside and radioed Jason. "We've got someone acting really strange at the north gate. Keep everyone out of the area." Jason came jogging up with first aid kit. He took one look and froze. "Dude, what's wrong with his jaw?" The man's jaw hung slack, like it had been dislocated or broken. Blood dripped down his neck and soaked his shirt. He was chewing air, snapping his teeth like he was biting through invisible wires. "I don't know," I whispered, "but I don't think he's normal." We locked the side gate and moved everyone inside. A couple of swimmers gave us strange looks, but no one had seen the man yet. Jason grabbed his phone and tried to call 911. No signal. That's when I checked mine again. Dead. Just blank, like the tower itself had dropped off the map. Maria was still at the front desk, tapping keys nervously. "The phones are out," she said. "Landlines too, everything's down." I was about to suggest we evacuate when one of the parents came rushing in through the front lobby. It was Dan McIntyre, whose daughter was in my level 2 swim class. He was covered in sweat, shirt torn at the shoulder. "There's something happening downtown," he said, panting. "It's not a riot. People are attacking each other. I saw a woman tear into someone's neck outside the trolley station on Park Boulevard. I ran. I just kept running." "Hold on, Dan. What do you mean attacking?" "I mean, they're biting people, Connor. And when they do, those people get back up and start doing the same thing." Jason dropped the first aid kit. "Like infected or something?" Dan nodded. "I don't know if it's a drug or a virus or what, but it spreads fast." We locked the facility down. I herded the swimmers and staff into the locker rooms while we debated what to do next. It was chaos outside the gates now. Sirens screamed in the distance, and smoke had started rising from a few blocks over. That heavy electrical silence you get before a thunderstorm settled over the building. Then, just after 7 a.m., the screaming began. I looked out through the side glass door and saw them. 3 people staggering into the parking lot. A woman in a nurse's uniform, a teenage boy, and another man, shirtless, with a giant gash across his stomach. They moved in broken steps, jerking like puppets, and their faces blank, yet locked in a grimace like they'd forgotten how to be human. They spotted someone, an elderly man from our aquatherapy class named Doug, trying to get into his car. He hadn't listened when we told everyone to stay put. Before I could open the door to warn him, they were on him. Doug screamed once. Then there was a horrible wet sound I'll never forget. We stood helpless, frozen, watching something out of a nightmare play out 20 feet away. "I'm getting the AED," Jason muttered. He didn't believe what he saw. None of us did. Dan grabbed his arm. "You can't help him. It's too late." I turned to Maria, who stood with her hand over her mouth. "Get everyone into the pump room, now. Lock it down." She nodded and moved fast, faster than I'd ever seen her move. I scanned the area and thought fast. The pump room had reinforced walls. It was small but secure. If this was real, whatever this was, we needed to survive until help came, and that meant locking it down and holding tight. I ran to the maintenance closet and grabbed a crowbar, a fire extinguisher, and one of the large red trauma bags. My dive knife was in my gear bag. I clipped it to my belt. The next 6 minutes were pure adrenaline. I helped Jason bar the entrances with lane dividers and benches. We unplugged everything electrical we didn't need. We killed the lights in the main facility to avoid drawing attention. But nothing we did changed the reality. The infected were here, inside the city, in numbers too big for law enforcement to contain. And something told me this wasn't going to be a one-night situation. This was the beginning of something much worse. By 7:20 a.m., we were inside the pump room. 15 of us in total, including staff, 2 kids, and 1 parent. The room was humid and loud from the filtration systems, but secure. I stood by the door with the crowbar in hand, eyes fixed on the small security monitor we'd rigged from the front desk feed. More people, things, were moving outside now. Their gait was uneven and twitchy, their clothes bloodied, their faces slack. Some moved slowly, dragging their limbs like puppets with tangled strings. Others jerked and twitched with sudden, violent spasms, banging into fences and windows with terrifying force. Jason stood a few feet away from me, watching the same monitor, pale and sweating. His hands were shaking. He was the youngest lifeguard on our team, only 21, but he'd always been level-headed. Now he looked like he was barely holding it together. The others, huddled against the wall near the chlorine tanks, were whispering among themselves. Maria had taken charge of the two kids, Abby and Liam, both no older than 8. She was trying to keep them calm, showing them how the pump controls worked, pretending it was all part of a strange game. Dan sat on a stack of pool chemicals, clutching a pool skimmer pole like it was a weapon. His eyes never left the door. I moved toward the storage shelves and checked the inventory. Most of it was standard maintenance gear, pH test kits, spare filters, gallons of muriatic acid, chlorine tablets, latex gloves, and cleaning supplies. I spotted a set of heavy-duty bolt cutters, a coil of paracord, and a toolbox with a few decent tools. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. My dive knife was still clipped to my belt. I handed Jason the crowbar and told him to stand near the door. The air in the pump room grew heavier as the hours passed. The lack of ventilation, mixed with the residual warmth from the equipment, made it feel like we were trapped in a sauna. I kept checking the monitor, flipping through each feed. Most showed the same thing: an empty pool deck, broken glass by the north entrance, and scattered personal belongings abandoned in the rush. But around 8:05 a.m., I noticed movement on camera 3, the one pointed toward the front lot. A white SUV with government plates pulled up just outside the gate. The driver, wearing a tan uniform and tactical vest, jumped out and started shouting at someone off-screen. Then the passenger door flew open and 2 more uniformed personnel emerged, one carrying what looked like a suppressed M4 carbine. They moved in tight formation, clearing the area like a trained unit. I recognized the vehicle instantly: San Diego County Sheriff's Department. I turned to Dan and pointed at the screen. "We've got responders at the front entrance." He sprang to his feet and took a closer look. The deputies were moving with purpose, checking vehicles and calling out orders, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. They weren't here for a routine wellness check. These men looked like they were in a live combat zone. One of the kids, Abby, started crying. Maria hugged her tighter and whispered softly. The sound must have carried beyond the door, because a second later we heard something scrape across the concrete just outside the pump room. Not footsteps, more like a dragging limb. Then a dull thud, like someone bumping into the wall. I motioned for everyone to stay silent and kill any noise. Jason dropped his radio volume to 0. I eased toward the door, peeking through the narrow window slit. One of the infected had wandered around the corner. Female, middle-aged, wearing hospital scrubs soaked in something dark. Her eyes were glassy, and her skin had a grayish, corpse-like hue. She stopped just outside the pump room and tilted her head sharply, as if listening. Then she began scratching at the door with the jagged edge of what used to be her forearm. For a full minute, none of us moved. Then a series of muffled pops echoed through the building. Suppressed weapons fire. On the monitor, I watched as the deputies engaged a group of infected stumbling in from the south lot. The infected didn't react like normal people. They didn't scream, duck, or flee. They charged, even after taking multiple rounds to the torso. Only when one of them was hit directly in the head did it drop instantly. That was the moment it clicked. They weren't just sick. They weren't just on something. They were completely gone. Their brains were no longer functioning the way a human's should. Center mass shots didn't stop them, but a clean shot to the head dropped them like a marionette with cut strings. One of the deputies, tall, bald, built like a linebacker, started shouting into a handheld radio. Another moved towards our facility, scanning the perimeter. I opened the pump room door a crack and waved frantically. He saw me. "Hold position," he shouted, raising one hand. "You got any injured?" "No, we're good," I called back, 15 inside, all healthy. He nodded and signaled to his team. A moment later, he was at our door, scanning the hallway with his sidearm before stepping inside. "Deputy Chavez, SDSO, we're evacuating civvies from critical zones. You guys are in a hot sector. Downtown's lost containment." "Lost containment?" I asked. He didn't mince words. "The hospitals are gone, most precincts too. We're falling back to Miramar. This is an organized exfil. They want as many survivors as possible off the grid before this spreads further north." Jason looked shocked. "Miramar Air Station?" "That's the fallback zone. Triage, shelter, supplies. But the roads are a war zone. You'll have to move smart." Dan stood. "How far is it from here?" 10, maybe 12 miles, but you'll never make it in cars. Traffic's gridlocked all through Balboa Park and the I-5 corridor. We're securing footpaths through canyons and side roads. Better visibility and fewer choke points. I knew the terrain, the back trails through Florida Canyon, then up through the Naval Hospital grounds. From there, we could skirt the edge of Balboa Park, pass through North Park, and eventually loop toward Claremont. Not an easy hike, but possible. "What about weapons?" I asked. "We've got kids with us." Chavez nodded grimly. "We'll supply you with a sidearm and extra mags, but that's it. We're stretched thin. You'll need to move soon. They're drawn to sound, light, and motion. Keep low, keep quiet." We didn't have time to overthink. By 8:40 a.m., we were outside the pump room, moving quickly along the poolside fencing while 2 deputies provided cover. Chavez handed me a Glock 17 with 3 extra mags. He looked me square in the eye. "You've got leadership, I can tell. Keep them safe." Then he turned and rejoined his team. We slipped through a maintenance gate and into the alley behind the aquatic center. From there, we crossed a narrow drainage channel and entered the network of bike paths that led into Florida Canyon. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows across the dry brush. Every sound, every rustling leaf or distant shout, made my heart jump. We moved in a tight line, Dan in the lead with the skimmer pole, Maria keeping the kids between her and the others, and me at the rear with the Glock and my dive knife. The city behind us was no longer recognizable. Smoke plumes rose from at least 3 separate areas. Distant sirens screamed and then cut out. A helicopter passed overhead, low and fast, heading northwest. We made it about half a mile before the first real test of our survival hit us. Near a rusted chain-link fence at the edge of the canyon, we came upon 2 figures. At first, I thought they were survivors. Both dressed in civilian clothes, one waving slowly. But something was wrong. The one waving had blood all down his arm, and when he moved forward, his head jerked unnaturally to the side. His jaw clicked open and shut like a machine out of alignment. Dan raised the skimmer pole. "Connor, what do we do?" I raised the Glock. My hands weren't shaking, but I felt the weight of what I was about to do. "Keep moving. I'll cover the rear." The second one hit the ground hard, skidding through the dust and coming to rest against a patch of dry sage. Its body twitched once, then went still. The smell hit us a second later, acrid, earthy, and tinged with something unnatural. Blood and rot mixed with sun-baked asphalt and the faint chemical tang of chlorine still clinging to my clothes. It turned my stomach, but I forced it down. There was no time to dwell. We had just made noise, gunfire, and I didn't know how many of those things were close enough to hear it. I lowered the Glock, checked the chamber, and reloaded. 1 magazine down. 2 left. We moved fast after that. The path through Florida Canyon was overgrown and winding. a rough strip of hard-packed dirt flanked by brittle brush and skeletal trees. The heat was rising quickly now, the dry air pulling moisture from our throats with every breath. Abby was starting to struggle. She was small, and her shoes weren't made for hiking through broken terrain. Maria hoisted her up without complaint, carrying her on one hip while still keeping her eyes moving. Liam kept pace just ahead of her, his little hands gripping the back of Dan's shirt like a lifeline. We stuck to the brush as much as we could, avoiding the more exposed bike trail and keeping low when we crossed open areas. There was no telling where the infected were coming from or how fast the outbreak was spreading. But every block, every bend in the trail, could be our last if we weren't careful. By 9:45 a.m., we reached the boundary near the eastern edge of Balboa Park. I could see the white stone of the Naval Medical Center's old walls just up the slope, partially obscured by the eucalyptus trees lining the canyon. Our plan was to push west through the hospital grounds, then veer north through the park's upper trails toward University Heights and eventually Miramar. But something was wrong. As we climbed toward the back entrance of the hospital, I saw movement near the ambulance dock. 3 figures in green fatigues, moving in formation. They weren't infected, at least not from the way they moved, controlled, weapons ready, eyes scanning, but they weren't acting like the deputies we'd seen earlier either. One of them had a gas mask clipped to his hip. Another was holding a clipboard, checking something against the building's outer wall. I motioned for everyone to stay low behind a row of broken concrete barriers. "Military," I whispered to Dan, "but not local. Could be federal." He frowned. "Think they'll help?" I wasn't sure. Something about their posture, their urgency, felt different. They weren't setting up aid stations or looking for survivors. They were cataloging, documenting, like they were trying to secure evidence before pulling out. I didn't like it. Just then, one of them turned toward the canyon, scanning the hillside with a pair of binoculars. I saw the flash of glass catch the sun. He spotted something, us, maybe, or something else. That's when the screaming started. Not from the building. This came from the trees further down the canyon. It was high-pitched, panicked, desperate. A woman's voice. Then 2 more joined in, shouting, running. Seconds later, a small group of civilians burst from the tree line below, scrambling up the hill. They were covered in dirt, one of them limping badly, another dragging a makeshift crutch. Behind them, a swarm of infected surged forward like a crashing wave, at least 10, maybe more, charging up the canyon slope. The soldiers sprang into action, shouting commands and raising their rifles. I recognized the fire discipline immediately. 3-round bursts, tight control, no panic. The lead infected dropped instantly, then 2 more. But there were too many, and they were too fast. I didn't hesitate. I stood up and fired twice into the mass, aiming high, trying to slow the pack. Dan and Jason joined in, hurling rocks, doing anything to draw attention away from the survivors. The infected, maddened by the noise and blood, split, half chasing the wounded civilians, half turning toward us. "Move!" I shouted, back toward the eucalyptus grove. We ran hard, cutting through the trees, dodging low branches and patches of sun-baked underbrush. Abby screamed once, clinging to Maria's neck. Liam tripped, but Jason scooped him up without breaking stride. My breath burned in my chest. Behind us, gunfire roared again. Then a sharper sound like metal hitting metal, followed by a muffled explosion. Dust and debris rained down. I turned once and saw a plume of smoke rising from near the dock. We reached the edge of the grove and ducked into a service tunnel entrance I remembered from an old drill. A narrow passage used by maintenance crews to access underground utilities. It was half buried in ivy, forgotten by most, but still open. I yanked the gate aside and ushered everyone in. The space was tight, damp, lit only by streaks of light from the grated vent shafts above. The air smelled of mildew and concrete, but it was a bottleneck, defensible, and, for the moment, quiet. Everyone slumped against the walls, catching their breath. Dan's shirt was soaked through with sweat. Maria's hands trembled as she set Abby down and checked her for injuries. Jason leaned back against the far wall, his eyes wide with adrenaline, the crowbar across his knees. We waited 5 minutes, 10. No sounds followed us in. No screaming, no gunfire, just the hum of distant traffic and the soft drip of water from a cracked pipe above. At 10:20 a.m., we regrouped. I checked the Glock, 1 mag and a half. We had no medical supplies, limited water, and no food except for a few granola bars Jason had stuffed into his pack, but we were alive. For now. "We can't go back," I said. "Too exposed. The hospital's compromised. We move north." "What about the others?" Maria asked. "The people that got out of the trees?" I didn't answer right away. I'd seen one of them go down hard. The soldiers might have held the line, or maybe they didn't. Either way, we couldn't afford to wait. Dan nodded. "North it is. Skirt the golf course, cut through the park's edge, and avoid the main roads." We slipped out of the tunnel and into a utility corridor near the park's upper fence. The sun was blazing now, casting everything in sharp, dry light. The city beyond looked worse than before. Smoke rising from multiple points, traffic abandoned mid-intersection, sirens still wailing somewhere in the distance, some looping endlessly. By 10:50 a.m., we passed through the quiet edge of North Park, weaving through alleyways and side yards. Most homes were empty. A few had signs of recent struggle. Doors ajar, windows broken, blood smeared across thresholds. I didn't let the kids see. We kept them between us, shielding them from the worst of it. A block from Morley Field, we heard the low rumble of an engine. Not a car, too heavy. A military transport, maybe. We ducked behind a chain-link fence and waited. Moments later, an armored personnel carrier rolled past, covered in dust and bearing no visible markings. No flags, no unit designators, just matte gray paint and a single mounted turret. It didn't stop. It didn't call out. It just kept moving, heading west. Jason looked shaken. "Where's everyone going?" "Not where we are," I said. "They're pulling out, fast." We moved again, crossing into the scrubby hills near the border of University Heights. A network of trails and service roads twisted through the brush here, and I knew if we could make it just a few more miles, we'd hit the edge of Kearney Mesa. From there, Miramar wasn't far. It was a gamble, but so was everything else we'd done so far. The sky was beginning to change, no longer that deep blue of early morning, but a smoky gray, blurred at the edges. Ash drifted down like dry snow, light but constant. A scent of it stuck in our noses, gritty and bitter. By 11:15 a.m., we were making our way past the last rows of homes on the east side of Park Boulevard. The streets were still mostly deserted, but signs of panic were everywhere. Tire tracks burned into lawns, garage doors left wide open, front porches littered with dropped groceries and torn backpacks. One house had its door nailed shut with 2x4s across the frame, and a message spray-painted in red, "No entry infected inside." We didn't go near it. Maria carried Abby on her back again, her small arms wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Dan and I took turns scouting intersections before leading the rest across. Jason stayed near the middle with Liam and the 2 other kids, holding the crowbar low and ready. Everyone moved quietly, even the children, as if speaking would bring the horror back down on us. We reached a dirt access road that ran under SR 163, a dry wash normally used by city maintenance. The underpass here was wide enough to walk without stooping and seemed, at least for the moment, unoccupied. But as we entered, the tunnel's echo wrapped around us in a strange way, each footstep bouncing back with a delay that didn't match the pace. I slowed my steps, held up a hand. Everyone froze. That's when I saw the figures at the far end. 3 of them, crouched low, half in shadow. At first, I thought they were survivors, maybe hiding. Then one moved, quickly, twitching in a sharp, angular motion. I raised the Glock instantly. Dan brought his bat up, just as a 4th one dropped down from the support beam above us, landing hard on all 4s just 20 feet away. It let out a low, wet sound that wasn't a growl, but wasn't quite a word either. I didn't wait. 2 quick shots, both to the head. It collapsed, flailing once before it went still. The others shrieked and charged. Jason stepped up, swinging his crowbar with a grunt, catching one in the jaw. A crack echoed down the tunnel, followed by a splatter. I fired at the 3rd, but missed. Maria shoved the kids behind the concrete support as Dan met the 4th attacker head-on, his aluminum bat smashing down in a wide arc. The infected didn't go down easily. Its body flailed even after 2 hits, reaching for Dan with broken fingers. I stepped forward and put a round through its skull. We didn't stop to check for more, we ran. Through the far end of the underpass and up the trail into Kearney Mesa. My lungs felt like fire, but we didn't slow until we reached the edge of an old commercial strip. A mix of medical offices, small warehouses, and auto repair shops. It was quiet, oddly so. The eerie kind of quiet that means either everyone's gone or watching. We found a locked side entrance to an HVAC supply warehouse and forced it open with the crowbar. Inside it was dark and dusty, but cooler, and the space gave us room to rest. Tall racks full of equipment created natural barriers. The back office had a water cooler, and we drained the last of it into our bottles. Dan found a small first aid kit in a cabinet. Just gauze, tape, and iodine, but it was something. We tended to the kids' feet and cleaned up the scrapes from our last fight. Jason sat down hard on the floor, breathing heavily. 12 hours, he said quietly. Almost. Almost, I agreed, checking my watch. It was 11:50 a.m. We needed a plan for the final stretch. From here, it was 3 miles to the north fence line of MK's Miramar, and that was assuming a straight shot, which we weren't going to get. The area between us and the base was cluttered with light industrial zones, strip malls, and freeway interchanges. Worse, we hadn't seen a single working police cruiser, fire truck, or ambulance in the past hour. Just that lone APC earlier, and it hadn't exactly stopped to pick us up. We had to assume that military protocol had shifted to lockdown. No evac, no rescue, protect vital assets. That meant, if we wanted inside Miramar, we'd have to reach the gates and prove we weren't infected. And even then, it was a gamble. At 12:05 p.m., we moved again, slipping out of the warehouse and cutting through the parking lots and service alleys behind Convoy Street. The area was strange without traffic. Normally, this stretch would be packed with lunch crowds and delivery trucks. Now, it was dead silent. We passed a sushi place with its windows shattered, tables overturned. A dry cleaner's with clothes still rotating on the overhead track, running on backup power. We were halfway through an alley behind a storage facility when we heard the chopper. It came in low from the northeast, a UH-60 Blackhawk with searchlights still mounted under the nose. It didn't land, just hovered above the intersection 2 blocks up. Through the swirling dust and haze, I could make out figures in hazmat gear on the rooftop of a nearby office building. They were lowering something, a crate or a device, onto the ground beneath the chopper. Then the helicopter pulled away, fast, banking out of view. Dan cursed. They're deploying something. What kind of something? Jason asked. I didn't answer. I had a terrible feeling. My first guess was decontamination gear, or maybe comms equipment. But then I remembered the crates I'd seen in Afghanistan years ago, the kind marked with the radiation warnings and biometric tags. The kind they only used when the situation was beyond control. We avoided that block entirely, cutting west toward Claremont Mesa Boulevard. As we passed through a narrow corridor between a tile store and a shuttered Vietnamese cafe, we saw them. Dozens of infected. Not clustered, not swarming, just moving. In groups of 3 or 4, wandering the parking lots and open spaces like animals. Searching. They hadn't seen us yet, and we weren't going to give them a reason to. We moved low and fast, darting from building to building, hugging the alleys. Twice, we had to wait in silence as one of them passed just feet away, twitching and jerking, sniffing at the air like it could smell the warmth in our breath. At 12:45 p.m., we reached a narrow footbridge that crossed over the 805 freeway. Below, the highway was a graveyard of abandoned vehicles. A few were burning. Several had crashed. One, a charter bus, had tipped over completely, blocking 3 lanes. No movement, no sirens. Just silence, except for the distant echo of rotor blades heading south. Across the bridge, we caught our first glimpse of the Miramar perimeter. Chain-link fence topped with razor wire, stretching east and west along the border of the base. Guard towers stood at intervals. One had a spotlight rigged on a pole. No soldiers in sight. The gate was half open, a Humvee parked across the gap. We approached carefully, sticking to the brush along the outer fence. It wasn't until we were 50 feet from the opening that we saw the figure lying motionless behind the Humvee's front tire. A Marine, young, helmet still on, no visible wounds, but he wasn't breathing. I crept forward with Dan. The rest stayed back in the shadow of a low wall. We checked the Marine's pulse. Nothing. His rifle had a full mag. The safety was off. There was a note pinned to his vest, barely legible. Hold the gate. Evac failed. Containment breached. Fall back to secondary line. That told me everything. The base wasn't safe, and yet we had nowhere else to go. At 1 p.m., the final hour began. We pushed through the outer gate into the base's edge. Supply sheds, fuel tanks, training yards. The place was eerily silent. We moved building to building, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could tell us what to do next. But it was clear they'd already pulled back further into the facility. Maybe underground. Maybe even off-site. Then, we saw the flashing red light atop a communications tower. A signal. Not broadcasting out, but inward. A beacon. We followed it to a reinforced bunker near the center of the base's training compound. The door was locked electronically, but someone had forced it open with a breaching tool. Inside was dark, musty, but the generator was still humming. Barely. We made our way down a flight of metal stairs into a chamber marked Quarantine Decon Zone 3. Empty, lights flickering. But there were supplies, MREs, water, medical packs, radio gear. Someone had turned this place into a fallback shelter, but hadn't stayed long. We didn't know if the infected could find us here, but it was the best shot we had. We sealed the door behind us. We barricaded the vents, and for the first time since 6 a.m., we sat down and breathed. By 1:32 p.m., the world outside had changed forever, but we were alive. And that counted for something. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.